Welcome, Foul Tarnished. You are listening to Elden Kings and Elden Ring Discussion. Tell me, friends, do you ever wonder about the prehistory of Elden Ring? Does the prior state of the world keep you up at night? Well, as they say, the past is another country. Luckily for you, we'll be covering all of that ground tonight and more. Joining me at the Roundtable Hold to speak about her own theories on Elden Ring's possible ancient Pangea effect and more is St Trina, not the alter ego of Mikola, but the real deal that posts on Twitter and streams on Twitch.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, Trina, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me, Gideon. I'm very excited to talk about, everything, really.
I'm pretty stoked to have you.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, getting into it, I know that you just released your Pangea theory earlier this week. That's a pretty exciting thing.
Yeah, it was a really big project, and it was one of those things where I feel like maybe you've only written you've written quite a good amount of stuff now, right? With if we're counting fanfic and all that.
Yeah, I had that master document I made last year back over the summer, and then I took a long break, and now I'm back at it with random fan fictions. The latest one is called Revelation of Kaz, and it goes over the fishing hamlet and how Gehrman, does some questionable things.
Yup. No shit. So
for real.
This was so you probably basically that was my premise to say you probably have felt this effect before, where when you're working on a project, it feels like you're running out of time on the other stuff. And for me, I was like, I really want to get back to playing Demon Souls. I really want to research. So I pushed this out of my brain as hard as I could on stream. Just so we could get it done, and but that ended up working out really well, because then we got a bunch of people on stream to throw in ideas, and we just ended up having a really good time with it. So I think really making it my main focus for a couple days made it turn out really well, and I'm glad it's off my plate.
Yeah, sometimes you have that idea that's just germinating in your subconscious, right, and it's niggling you at the back of your mind, and you just can't get it out of your head.
You gotta just push it through so you can get on to the next thing and resume the rest of my life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, within this Pangea theory, like you said, I mean, it was a lot to think about, and it took a couple of days effort of just fevered lore hunting and whatnot. Starting at the beginning, I saw you sponsored it in your tweet, releasing the whole document, but you had this thing about hand imagery, and now I have to hand it to you. I have never really done that research before myself. And it was really in depth. Would you want to go into that, your insights and whatnot?
Absolutely. So, one of the cool things about Elden Ring, and all from software work and Miyazaki work, but I think it shows itself a lot more in Elden Ring than ever before, is just reused ideas. Right. I think a lot of people who have been around the block for a while know that From Software does this, but they just really turned it up to 11. So maybe I'll just give you the first. We'll just read out the first slide here so we can get ourselves started. Basically, the idea is that a hand unfurling is one of the most repeated visual motifs in Elden Ring. So if you're holding your hand and it's just opening, that's one symbol, right? And depending on the context you put it in, or how you manipulate it, you can use it to mean a lot of different things. So in Elden Ring, I would say it's used in a couple different ways, but usually it is referring to somebody on our plane of existence trying to ascend to another plane of existence. Or, in the case of the Elden Beast, that's probably my favorite gif. That's just literally the embodiment of the cosmos. When the Elden Beast first appears and his hand is coming out of the sludge, and then he like whips up and points his hand at the sky. That's kind of like how I think of my true north for this image, right? So that little like grasp towards the sky, in a way, is kind of like the narrative thrust of the story to me. And the reason I feel so strongly about this, and the reason why I think it's really cool, is that all this corroboration and stuff that you're saying is like really in depth. I kind of just stumbled onto that, you know, because like while I was gathering the gifts of everything, like I knew this was in the game, right? But I gathered maybe like 50% of them, and then when I was on stream, people were like reminding me of other ones. And when you like just start putting them all together and like you collect them all and put them all next to each other, you're like, holy shit! All these stories are all like really similar, and they all deal with the same things. And then you realize that there's almost like I guess like a secret language, and that's what alchemy is all about, right? Having a secret symbolic language, and I think it's taken a while for Miyazaki to really like earn that language over the games, and now that we have Elden Ring, it's just been like ruminating, and they've like tweaked what hands mean in different contexts, and you know, they all center around desire, but what that desire is used for in the overall story is totally different in each of the games. And I just think that there's just so many little nuggets in Elden Ring where like all of the symbolic imagery in game and all of the language points in the same direction, so that even if the text doesn't tell you what happens, everything else is already telling you what's going on. So hands are one of the really cool ones, and an unfurling hand specifically, I think, is what Elden Ring is all about. Like,
Yeah,
but
it has like the
I
furled
think I'm getting a little
fingers.
bit ahead of myself. Yeah, yeah. Here, I'll pass it. Say what you're gonna say. Sorry.
No, you're okay. It's like hands are very much a centerpiece of the imagery in Elden Ring, and
Right.
it's like you say, it is like a culmination of this worked upon theory because we've seen it before. In your model, you have that picture of Gale reaching towards the heavens to symbolize sort of his desires to reunite the Dark Soul and his own like personal goals.
Mm-hmm.
He's reaching towards you. He wants your Dark Soul, but like you
Mm-hmm.
have it repeated in Elden Ring in such a complex and more overarching manner. You know, you start with the two fingers and the three fingers, and then you
Right.
have all of these different visual designs throughout the game. And it's like you said, it's you started putting together the footage, and everything started to click. Like, you know, it wasn't even like you were like theorizing at that point. It was like you were stumbling on something because
Right.
it's just such a
I'm
recurrent
just like, here,
theory.
look, it's right there.
You're like this heretical like historian that's finding some sort of ancient history, and you're like, guys, you have to hear about this.
Yes, exactly. So that's kind of like the what I would call the real part of the conspiracy theory. And then from like the real imagery, then we can build our insanity model, basically. So maybe I'll give you let me give you like the main idea, since I know some people probably haven't ever heard of this idea before, and then maybe we can go into like whatever you want to, basically, like what you find interesting about it. So the main thrust of the theory, at least my version of the theory. So there's like a couple different people who have worked with this, um, but the precipice of everything was a video by the Ashen Scholar. Ashen Scholar, great lore YouTuber homie of ours.
Go
He-
look them up on YouTube. I'll link
yeah,
them
it's
below.
great. It's a great video. It's called "Connecting Caelid and the Mountaintops," and basically it just goes over all of the different stuff that exists both in the Forbidden Lands and Caelid. Namely, we're talking about the super huge Giga Giants and the uh, Dino Dogs and Dino Birds. that are in both zones, as well as some dragons. And one thing that I think kind of got lost to time in the Twitterverse was, and I don't know if Ash's Scholar might have actually mentioned it in the video, but there was also somebody early on who mentioned that the scaling of Upper Caelid, where Dragon Barrow is actually the same as the mountaintops themselves. So that's like a really weird, like, moment. You know, you could say like, oh, they just wanted this end game area to be somewhere you go back to, and like maybe that's a little bit true, but I feel that it is a hint.
And it definitely sort of follows, because you've got this idea of Dragon Barrow as like the barrow of the dragons. It's where they were buried after
Right,
they lost their war. And if you
right.
understand,
Oh,
like,
good
you know,
point.
like in Dark Souls 1 with the Tomb of the Giants, or in Dark Souls 2, how the
Hmm.
giants are inherently linked to the dragons, there's like a recurring imagery of the giants being associated with the dragons. Like Dark Souls 1, they get
Yep.
genocided with the ancient dragons. Dark Souls 2, they're linked to them metaphysically. So, like, maybe that is like a little hint. Like the giants served the dragons because they existed back then, and maybe back then, you know, the land was connected. Because like, why else would
Hmm.
there be a giant skull in Caelid? So I think your theory definitely adds up when you consider it with some like other imagery or ideas that are like
Right.
metatextual.
So that's where me and the other lore theorists kind of like diverge, and that's why I focused my document on this furled finger imagery, is because they have other theories. It's basically, so the idea here is that Caelid and the mountaintops have to be related somehow. We don't really know what it's supposed to mean, but I'm fairly convinced it means something, right? um, so my theory is that the world was, it looks like a finger, and then but further back in time, it could have been more clenched together, and then Caelid could have been right next to the mountaintops. Uh, but their theory is that maybe there was a land bridge, and that there was just more landmass there. And so I will need to let them lay those out because they have a lot of their own reasons for looking into those things that I don't think they've fully laid out yet. Um, at least I know Ash's Scholar hasn't. I don't know if Quailag is going to like dive more into this or just go on to other things, but I think Ash's Scholar will expand on their land bridge theory. But point being, there's something fishy going on. And I think that basically because the game has so much um like haha lol science references in it, that we're probably looking at something where the continents were closer together. Fair Missoula was in the middle. I think the middle. Some people think Wailing Dunes, some people have different spots for it, but I think the middle. And um once natural disasters such as meteors, probably meteors, we can get into that if you want, um, happened and destroyed Fair Missoula, then the continents started to drift apart and the tectonic plates had been like utterly destroyed, basically, in my head canon, by all of these meteors. And so then it just started drifting apart, and then you have the imagery becomes that of a fist that is formed, and then over time that fist opens up as Kayla drifts away, and it looks kind of like an unfurled finger. And then eventually, if we were to fast forward it to say after we become Elden Lord and we make everything hunky dory and everybody's chilling in some hypothetical scenario, then eventually maybe it would even look like the tarnished wizened finger. If you guys remember what the tarnished wizened finger looks like, it's the same image of a furled finger, but it's like relaxed. It's just like a little bit bent. It's got
Yeah,
some
it's pointed
intention to
out.
it. It's like pointing at something. It's doing something, but it's not so intense, I guess, of a pose.
Yeah, it's unfurled, one could
Yeah.
say.
Exactly. And that's what I think the whole imagery is supposed to express, is like a human gains wisdom, and as they gain wisdom, their fear turns to ambition. So like the fear would be like the clenched fist version, and you're like not secure. You're like trying to hold on to things, and then that fear turns into ambition, and then you're like kind of pointed out. You're like trying to grasp at something outside of yourself, and then eventually, as you gain wisdom and stuff, you start to realize that like you have what you need. Basically, is like you don't need that ambition to like drive you anymore, and you've become wizened, if you will.
It's like the world itself, like the continental landmass is a hand and it's slowly unclenching, unfurling, like you
Right.
say. And if you
Mm-hmm.
want to compare that to like the three fingers and two fingers, then maybe it's like the three fingers who are regressive, they can only interact by grabbing at you, making a fist.
Mm-hmm.
And the two fingers can only interact with you by like wiggling in an unfurling
Extending.
position. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, maybe that's another hint at what's going on.
Totally. No, I do think that I don't have like the full idea on what the two fingers are representing exactly yet. But the three fingers seem a little bit more easy to understand, I would say, because their grasping imagery again has been used so many times in like I would say vaguely. I would say negative. It's like kind of harsh, hard to say negative or positive when it comes to Miyazaki stuff because everything has shades of gray. But I would say that the grasping hand is in the category of things that are going to lead you down a bad path
Yeah,
in
it's part of like
Miyazaki
the
land.
greed and ambition that's sort
Right.
of right. Like with Rykard, he ruins himself through greed and
Mhm.
ambition. Reaching for something you cannot attain is like.
Oh shit. Okay, you totally just made me understand this. The picture of all the hands like trying to hold the staff. Yeah,
The
Rykard
picture.
has this. Yeah, what is it called?
Um, you mean the one that Banal uses, the weapon, or
Yes, I think that is what it's called. Yeah, it
yeah,
is
it's
that
like the
one.
serpent trying to devour the world. So it's like the
Yes,
serpent's mouth is trying to And then you also have Gideon's staff, which is like a hand trying to grasp at an eye, which represents knowledge and the
yep,
world and everything. So it's
totally.
yeah. So you mentioned Cataclysm being the genesis for this sort of tectonic drift, and you mentioned the
Hmm.
meteorites specifically. I was wondering, like I mean, obviously we see the mountaintop of the giants is sort of data. Same thing with the consecrated snowfield to an extent. Like they're all snowy. There's nothing that grows or lives there. Even on the map, you can see that it's a different shade, very starkly to the rest of the world, and
Yeah.
like Flame
Hmm.
Peak itself has to be chained up. So is this idea of like chaining the world together to make sure it doesn't fall apart part of this cataclysmic idea that's ruined the land? Are those together, or do they feed into each other at all?
I do think so. So one of the things that made me think that this was possible in general is just all the chasms that are in the mountaintops in general. And one thing I didn't write on my report, um, what we could talk about now is if you look at the old, um, yeah, I'm hovering over it. The old concept art for the map. I straight up thought this was fake when I first saw it. I was like, no, that's not real. And then I saw that somebody posted it like before the game came out, and like, and it was real. I think it was in like the art book eventually and shit. So it clearly is real. And the mountaintops, they have like a much more obvious um like chasm here. It's like just one big split down the middle rather than a bunch of craggly splits. Like you could kind of like write them off in the current version of the game as like, oh no, mountains are just like that, bro. They just got some chasms in them sometimes. But like in the old design, I think it's even more obvious that like it's supposed to be not normal. Like
Yeah, because the
something
crack goes
happened
through
to
the
it.
entire landmass. It's cutting the
Right.
entire cliff away from the rest of the mountain tops.
Hmm. So it's possible that it is a totally different natural disaster. But the one thing that I would say for sure is A, there were meteor strikes. Very likely multiple, but we don't know if it was multiple events or just one event. And then there definitely were uh, huge level natural disasters in general of some type. maybe this was a different type of natural disaster, but the ones we can say for sure are that comets came down, and at some point, like, shit got real enough to affect the world in a very serious way.
Yeah, and we know from like real life inspiration that comets aren't exactly a friendly thing to the topography of a landscape. They're rather
Right.
destructive.
Yeah. It's kind of like crazy how much destruction a comet can do to a planet.
Yeah, actually, it's sort of wild.
Mm.
So something I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on is, as a possible sort of cataclysmic event, we have Destined Death talked about by a lot of the Finger Maidens, especially, as this terrifying force that could kill the world itself. And I
Mm.
wonder if you could take this in a literal sense, where you could assume that the reason there's only spirit things like spirit trees and spirit deer and whatnot on the mountaintops is that Destined Death has gone through and it's killed the living life force, the vitality of the land, and that could be why it's
Oh.
sinking into the ocean. And that,
And
like, oh, go on.
that would make the scar make more sense. Because it's pretty different from the crater in the middle. There's like this giant crater in the middle. It's like if we look at the old map, it's probably easiest to see. There's like a huge crater in the middle, but the mountaintops splitting seems much more akin visually to like Godwin's like scraggly little um
Oh,
scar
the
on his back.
Hallow brand. I didn't even
Yeah,
connect
exactly.
that. That's fascinating. Like, it looks like the centipede wheel, the way it's got the sort of fringes.
Right.
Um, I'm definitely gonna put this map of the like proto artwork into the video here for visuals for any of the viewers.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. I'm definitely gonna
Yeah, I love.
tweet or make a blog post about it too. Like, it's sort of
Yeah.
insane to look at. You can see they used to have the Halig tree. They intended it to be south of Liurnia, and you can sort of see the remnants of it on the map. And you
Yep.
can also just like Liurnia itself was definitely meant to be a lake. It was like Avalon before it was made to be like this
Yeah, I
shadow
think
mud pit.
yeah. I think they had like a better way for us to get around at first. Like they were thinking about boats or something, and they
Screw
just
torrents,
never
I
even
want
got close.
boats. um so yeah, moving past the idea of like destined death and the Oda tree being the anchor of all lands, I was reading another little point in your Pangea theory where you sort of described the Crucible as being the beginning point of the universe and the sort of theorized end point where the frenzied flame will one day devour all life into chaos unending.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
it's like that idea sort of, like you compare it to the Big Crunch where like everything will go back to like the way it was as the Big Bang when
Hmm.
our real life universe ends. And I'm not sure if you've seen the anime Neon Genesis Evangelion, but that entire story is about humanity, humans, like through a shadow government, trying to revert themselves into the primordial goop that they were at the beginning of existence. So like go
Whoa.
back to the beginning of the evolutionary line, which is what the crucible of life represents. So, like, I don't know. There's a confluence of things going on there. So, I guess I wanted to ask you about the Big Crunch and your thoughts on it, and also see if you've
Yeah.
watched Evangelion.
So I haven't, and literally people tell me like every day that I need to watch it. So it's on the list. I will definitely watch it. But let me give you my little spiel, because I don't know if yeah, I like sort of did it justice in this, but it really could be its own thing, right? So let me start with just how I read the game in general. So in Elden Ring, we talked about the language that Miyazaki has, but he's actually just he doesn't stop there. He's borrowing symbols from wherever the heck he wants, and in particular, when we've been looking into them and like digging back to where they come from or where we think they come from, you can't really fully prove it, but you can find lots of reference images that look really similar and stuff. You can get to the point, especially with this game, where like you can start dating things. You can start saying like, all right, this stuff looks like Mesopotamian architecture, and then you go to the next civilization and it looks like Byzantine or Roman architecture. So there's a lot of attention to detail in that realm, and I think that that also seeps into the ethos of the game. And if you come at it from that approach, then certain ideas, as we've been looking at all of the different symbols in game, we find tons of stuff from real life and history. And on top of that, we find a lot of symbols from a lot of different fields of thought and different religions. And the cool thing about those symbols is that they're basically like mashups. So let's pretend we're taking like the Caden riders, who are the horse people that you see in Limgrave with the dismounters and whatnot.
Yeah,
Uh,
like the barbarians that were hired as mercenaries.
exactly. And they love their horsies. So when we were looking into that, and I think Rachel did most of the research on them, to be honest, um, there are a bunch of different symbols from different horse like related societies over in like the Eurasian steppe and places like that. Um, but they also have their own themes in game. So basically, if you're talking about any one character in game, there's kind of like an input output thing going on where you take a bunch of different historical symbols and meanings and stuff that we've used for years and years and years that are kind of like, you could say, built into the subconscious of the world a little bit because there are symbols that have been used so long. You swirl them all together, you kind of like mix them up, kind of like almost you're the Crucible, and you spit them out on the other side, and then you get a new symbol. And that new symbol means something slightly different than the constituent parts. Uh, so I'm saying all that to say that when we're looking for like the things that they're referencing, they're going to reference symbols that already ride those lines. So like if the biggest one that people pick up on early on is science and spirituality, right? Rhea Lucaria is like the easiest example of this, where they are like all mind, and they get to the point where they achieve their version of enlightenment, and their version of enlightenment involves not having any emotions, or just like being inanimate and being a part of like just being knowledge incarnate, basically. Um,
Yeah, like Azur and Lusa are literally crystallizing within their brains, and they're sort of the
yes.
height of what Rhea Lucaria can achieve. You know,
So for
like
them, their pursuits of knowledge are spiritual. So when I was like looking for things that they're referencing in game, uh, the Big Bang and the Big Crunch, those make sense to me as symbols to like base your story around, because they ride those lines so well. Like they, for not for everybody that studies it, of course, some physicists are like, no, this has nothing to do with God. But for a lot of physicists that are obsessed with figuring out what happens at the beginning and end of time, uh, that is an extremely spiritual journey for them. You know, so a lot of
yeah,
them
it's like
literally
science
think of it as encountering God.
Yeah, science where science fails and there's just ignorance, like people turn to spirituality as a way of reasoning out with what they
Right.
know and the unknown. You know, like people talk about God as not being like an entity, but like the equal sign that goes between two truths. So those two truths are like the ignorance, the unknown you have to deal with, the fact that we can't literally know what happens at the end of the universe. But then you
Hmm.
also have the scientific basis, and you're like, well, I can think through what might happen. It's
Right.
interesting
I
that.
can get pretty darn close if I try.
Yeah. And I feel like
So,
they.
yeah,
Oh, so
go
go
ahead.
on. I'm sorry.
No, I was just gonna say that basically, because Hayata references everything starting from one great, because we have the law of causality, which references all things being linked, and then we have the law of regression, which references everything coming back together, and we have an ending that also lines up with everything coming back together. To me, that just tells a story of everything starting at one point and everything ending at one point. And if we're thinking of a parallel in our real life that would, sum up that in a spiritual way, it would be the Big Bang and the Big Crunch. So that's kind of like how I ended up there, how I end up interpreting the Flame of Frenzy ending as referencing the Big Crunch.
I like that
Spiel over.
explanation. It was a good spiel. That's why I have you on.
Thank you.
No, I mean it's really interesting to put it that way because I feel like it makes a lot of sense, and I think it's definitely a part of the intention. Like, obviously the crucible of life is like the genesis of life, isn't exactly the Big Bang in like the literal sense of Elden Ring, but there's a lot of way,
Right.
like you said, like you take something from real life that's just subconscious to all human knowledge, something so ingrained
Hmm.
as knowledge of how what the universe has started, what we know of it as a human species, and you take like this idea of it all started as one being and then it branched out from there. Elden Ring's not really caring about how the universe created, it's caring about how the lands between created. And that's with
Right.
the frenzied flame, and that's how it ends, just like how our universe begins and ends at the same point. You can even interpret the frenzied flame ending, that giant ball of fire above the burnt out Erd tree, as the crucible of life
Yeah.
reconfiguring, burning out the Erd tree, and escaping in its new frenzied state. Like, there's a lot of
It,
connections to be made.
it really does look like a singularity in the middle too. It almost looks like somebody else's big crunch is coming and just bursting forth into us.
Yeah, when universes collide.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe their next game will pull a Drakengard where the Elden Beast flies into Tokyo City and gets shot down by the Tokyo military, and then it's studied, releasing white ash or sand or whatever the chlorification thing. What
Yeah.
have you played Drakengard? This probably doesn't make any
No,
sense.
no, but I am following you because uh my sister and I watched different versions of Full Metal Alchemist. And we didn't realize we watched different versions of Full Metal Alchemist until we started describing the ending, and she was like, "No, they go to London. They go to real life London for some reason." I'm like, "No, it doesn't happen like that."
The
So yeah.
original Full Metal Alchemist anime was really working with what they had, and I guess they
Yeah.
really wanted to like go beat up Nazis. That was definitely
Yeah.
not where I thought the plot was going.
Fan service for a show that doesn't have sex. So what are they gonna do?
I guess they found out what they could try at the very least. um
Uh, yeah.
So, in your Pangea theory, you had this really nice idea that the time wheel in Elden Ring, like the little iconic thing that marks out the
Hmm.
day-night cycle that spins around when you rest at the grace site, that it depicts various regions in game, possibly with
Mhm.
its own like sort of decor art on it. Um, would you like to talk about that at all?
Hell yeah, definitely. Okay, so I would say this is okay, so they're kind of like tied, right? I think the furled finger part and this part are like the most convincing to me. Um, so I hope I do it justice. So the idea, let's start with the idea of Farah Missoula being in the middle of the map. Let's just pretend that's a given because that'll make explaining the rest of this a lot easier.
No
So
problem.
if Farah Missoula is in the middle of the map, and then if you look at the compass or the time of day wheel, you can notice that there is a storm right in the middle of the wheel. And it looks an awful lot like there's like some draconic beings flying around it almost. They kind of look like sea creatures, which is a whole nother tangent that we don't like. If we go down that, I'll get fully derailed. So let's just pretend they're draconic. So there's like some flying dudes around here. So maybe this circle in the center represents Farum. because it's a storm, it moves in a circle, and that kind of feels like time.
Yeah, it
So
definitely
that
was
could be pretty
striking to
appropriate.
me. Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's like the wheel of time moving in the center. That would be pretty poetic, in my opinion. But then, as I zoomed in on it, I noticed that the little ball and the needle that point towards the middle actually looks a lot like a comet, pointing straight at the middle. So the idea here is that if this Pangea theory is true, perhaps this is foreshadowing, uh, telling us what happened in the world and what put it in its current state, and maybe it's depicting a meteor striking Fair Missoula. Okay, so let's pretend you believed me, and then we move over to the rest of the time dial. So we've got the brown bit that it like rotates around, but we also have this colored circle in the middle. And the colored circle in the middle is where things get really interesting. And I'm going to put a pin in what doesn't work about this. Maybe you'll remember, I might forget. But when I'm done with this spiel, let's talk about what doesn't look quite right.
absolutely.
Okay, thank you. So let's pretend if Ferrum is the brown bit in the middle, let's pretend we can give all of the regions in the game and or major landmarks in the game a different color. And if you notice, they all have different colors on the map. So if we give them a different color and then assign those colors to different times of day, then we can make basically a little map of our actual map of the lands between onto the time wheel. And in basically quote unquote chronological order, we can go from Kaled, which is kind of our red afternoon color, to Limgrave, which is kind of like our dusk green color. And that's one of the ones that I came up with late in the game. So we can zoom in on that if you want to talk about it in a second. Then we go on to Liurnia, which is like our blue nighttime zone with all the moon stuff and all that. And then we have the Dectus lifts.
Vectis Dawn.
And yeah, so I wrote Dectus Dawn just to like remind myself that basically if you were to map all these out and they're like cosmologically aligned to different times of day, Dectus is basically like the precipice between night and early morning. So that makes it dawn, which I just thought was cute.
I can see how the logic follows there.
Yeah, and when you hit the imagery works too, because when you're in this little zone and you get to the other side, that's you like get a big reveal and it's like the sun is um rising. You get like this big valley of gold in front of you when you
Yeah,
open
you're
your eyes.
even like going up vertically from
Yeah,
Liurnia to the Altus Plateau, so you're ascending, there's like a
exactly.
whole thing there.
So from there, we got early morning being Lanedell, and then midday could be the mountaintops. So if we take our model that we've been talking about this whole time and we scooch Kaled over near the mountaintops, then we basically get like a circle. And that circle and or ring has all the colors in the same order as the times of day on our little dial. And because these symbols just like match up so easily, to me, it's just like I think they're just leaving us little hints. Like something's going on here. I don't know if we have the exact answer of what it is, but they definitely seem to line up that way on purpose. And I am remembering everything I wanted to talk about. So let me zoom in on Dusk really quick. So if you one of the very first criticisms that people are going to give us of this part of it is, yo, green isn't on there. Green isn't on there. But actually is a little bit of green just hidden. Right past the red bit and right before the blue bit, there is like a hill. And they purposely colored it green. Like all of the other land masses and little bits of land are the color of the background it's with. but this random one is green instead of blue. So I think that was them being like, oh shit, dusk isn't really in there. Yeah, make it green.
I mean, that makes sense. Although I guess they didn't really. Would they need a dusk if they didn't have it as an in-game time, and if there wasn't a region that matched up to it? Or are you saying that
Right.
dusk is Limgrave?
Yes, dusk is Limgrave. That's
Oh,
what I
I
meant.
see. I
There,
see.
so at first it's like, oh, Limgrave is green, but there's no green on this time dial, but there is. It's just kind of like hidden. And so
Okay.
you might be quick to dismiss it and just be like, okay, it's just greenish. They're just doing a nice transition. But the reason I do think it's on purpose is because we meet Melina here, and she is the gloam-eyed person, and gloam is dusk. And since we meet her here, I think we're meeting her at dusk.
Yeah, and you do see her at night in the cutscene, although that was probably a visual motif just because nighttime visits
Right.
are cooler and it makes it look like you're sitting at a bonfire. But like, I mean, that is another
True.
thing to consider within the plot that we're presenting. Um, I find that striking. I think honestly, the center of the time dial looking like Farah Missoula is definitely like almost like I'm sort of sold on that, even if the rest of it I think can like remain up into like up in like the theorizing air. But like the center of it with the way that the dragons, or like you say, they could be fish, or but the way that it looks like with the flying creatures going around it in a twister,
Yup.
definitely feels, it's the twister outside of time, the storm beyond the time. The ancient
Yeah,
dragons represent
totally.
the storm and they are timeless. So, like, definitely Ferrum at the center. And the fact that it's the dial that represents time, and it's shaped like a meteor. Like, within Dark Souls 1, we know that the first flame is what literally started time for the Dark Souls universe. So, for like,
Yeah, I forgot about that.
for like Elden Ring, since the Elden Ring is the analog to that, since the golden star coming with the Elden Beast is what precipitates the first flame event in time beginning, like prehistory is prehistoric before time passes and is recorded.
Wow.
Like you've got this idea of representation there, and I think like that might have absolutely been intended, and I'm completely in love with it. Like
Yeah.
I like that a lot.
Me too. Me too. This game is too good.
It
It's like
is.
it's the same thing. It's just turned up to 25, you know? It's just
Yes.
like they just juiced it full of George R. R. Martin.
They were like they finished the trilogy and two other games besides, and they were like, okay, that was fucking awesome, but like there's some
Yeah.
issues with Dark Souls 1 that we have to go and address, and we have so many ideas now. Let's fucking perfect it. And then they just
Yeah.
took all of the ideas of the trilogy, put it gave it a new nice setting that was way more like culturally inspired and like vague in its actual morality, and then you've got like this amazing game.
Yeah. It really is just wonderful.
So
Okay, so I wanted to piggyback off that a little bit and ask you a question.
okay.
Do you think that some of our geekiness about recurring themes, recurring characters, and all that, do you think it would be slightly diminished had they not built it off of the bones of Dark Souls 3? Because to me, I kind of like I love that they did that. It saved them time, it saved them creative juice, and I think they got to inject that energy into all the other aspects of the game, and I think that's part of why it was so great.
You mean like how the engine is somewhat taking a lot of the stuff that was used in Dark Souls 3 and not like
Yeah, it's
it.
like a common complaint from old heads, you know? It's just like it feels a lot like Dark Souls 3, but then they added an L2 button. But
Okay.
like to me, that enhances it because they're making commentary on their previous work.
Yeah, so From Software has like since Dark Souls 2 even been like they had like this careful refining process where they look at what happened and worked before and they're like, how can we make this better? So like, Dark Souls 2 has a lot of complaints about it because they took away poise, they made armor worse, and then they make dodges based off of like adaptability. But the
Mhm.
mindset there was that Dark Souls 1 can be trivialized by wearing heavy armor and poise tanking the entire game.
Oh
And
yeah, that's true.
most people had the most fun playing it where they were light rolling, where they were engaging in the dodge mechanic. So what Dark Souls 2 tries to do is they try to make it so that light rolling is a stat to level so it feels more engaging. But of course it's not more engaging because that's taking skill and player skill and it's putting a stat
Yeah.
to it, which isn't fair and it doesn't feel good to level because it makes it feel like you just have to require level it. Um
Oh, you
and
see
that's something
exactly
that
where they
they
got confused there.
yeah, you can really like it's a very forgivable mistake when they're literally defining the action genre for this entire sort of Souls-like category.
Good point. Good point.
But like, you know, it also deserves its critique. And like Dark Souls 3 had its own issues. Like Dark Souls 3 is talked about as the R1 spam game, but that's only because R1 spam is never punished. Like
It's so
um
good.
yeah, like if you compare fighting a Lothric Knight to any of the Elden Ring Knights, you can kill a Lothric Knight as soon as you hit it once to break its poise, because it'll die from the entire rest of you chaining permanent stamina against it. But like Elden Ring, they will recover their poise and they'll fight back at some point. The only way to permanent
Mhm.
stagger them is with careful Ashes of War usage or with jump canceling your attack animation into another jump attack, which is like way more complicated and like
That sounds really hard. That sounds
I mean it's
unnecessarily
not
hard.
too bad. If I actually did it on my when I was finishing my Elden Ring game again, like Let's Play against a lot of the
Yeah,
enemies in Farum Azula and especially against Gideon. So it's like once you get used to it, it's like
right.
you know, it's not terrible, but yeah. It's like you have to
Yeah,
learn the patterns of the enemy to do it. You can't just grab a long weapon and then poke people to death because they can't react anymore after you hit them once.
right.
So anyway, answering your question, it's like I think Elden Ring was still focused on perfecting what they had done before. So like it sort of felt natural to take the previous engine and not try to make something new like Sekiro did, or even something that had like a new mechanic that was core to its feature like Bloodborne did. That was like also partly like saving time. Like you have to spend a lot of time making those systems and testing them, but if they go with the tried and true ideas of just what they've tested before, they can then make bosses that cater to their new systems. Like
Right.
a major change in Elden Ring is that from Dark Souls 3 to Elden Ring, you have this in like Dark Souls 3, it doesn't matter what direction you roll almost all of the time. As long as you roll at the right moment, you'll iframe it and you'll be okay because your roll is far enough to get you out
Oh.
of danger and it's long enough that like you can literally roll into someone's chest and you'll be okay. But Elden Ring, specifically, if you roll into someone's chest too much, the AI will not stop attacking because the AI's attack patterns are tied to how close you are to the AI when it's determining its future attacks.
Smart.
So on top of that, like you also have like Godfrey and Radagon have a lot of attacks like these where you have to roll left and then right or the right and then left to like accurately dodge them. So
I
like
didn't even notice I was doing that. I have tons of
yeah,
moves like that in my head where I'm like left, right, left, forward.
yeah, exactly. And like it trains you because a lot of the time the direction you roll is like inverted to the way they swing. It feels very realistic. Like rolls don't
Yes.
feel like you have iframes, it feels like you're rolling under an attack. And I feel like that's part of where they perfected it, but where they lost some of their player base because you have people coming to it from Dark Souls 3 or Bloodborne where you have these insane dodge lengths and you really
Mhm.
just don't get punished for spamming. Like Sekiro is famously hated because the dodge, you have to know what you're doing if you want to dodge and
The
not get
dodge doesn't do
punished.
anything unless you're like actually getting out of there.
Uh-huh. Like it makes you parry, but people don't
Yeah.
want to play like that. And you know, like it's like the classic Souls fan setting themselves up for failure like by trying to play the game the way they want to play it. Like
Yeah, yeah, it's true. I mean, that's kind of like what they're trying to teach us is like we're gonna keep switching it up. They
yeah, and like
like the
adapting
shield
is the
and
best
Bloodborne and
part.
whatnot. Yeah, yeah, I agree. I agree. We're like, I feel like we're probably like the bottom layer. If we're like talking tiers of obsession with From Software, you and I are like on the same wavelength.
I'm so glad. That's like half the best
Full
part of
insanity.
making. Exactly. Like this podcast is all about just going full geek on like the entirety of From Software and other pop culture. Because like, who
Yep.
in my natural life, like, am I gonna meet someone at my job that relates to
No.
this? Like,
No, not at all.
they just like, you play Elden Ring? What are you, some hardcore gamer? And I'm like, 20 million people bought it.
Yeah. Yep.
Ah. Okay,
What's
that was
next?
pretty in depth. Let's get a little bit into like your general history with these games. I mean, like they are so
Sure.
cool. You know, we don't get to talk about them so much. So, like, yeah, tell me about like your exploits, your adventures. Like, what was your first Souls game? Was it Elden Ring
Yes.
or? Okay, okay, a
So no, no,
newcomer to
no,
the
no, no. It
series.
wasn't. It was. It was. It wasn't. I
Oh.
just said yes. It was just the internet screwed us up there. So my first was Dark Souls 1 in 2011, I want to say. So like short-ish after it came out.
Okay.
And I've just been hooked ever since. So I played a shitload of Dark Souls 2. I didn't finish every. Okay, so here's my sins with the Souls series is that I play them a ton. Um but sometimes I burn out, and when I burn out, I just don't do it. I never come back and like finish it. Maybe I will now that I'm streaming. So I've got like a few DLCs that are like shamefully unfinished. Like um the final boss of the Bloodborne DLC, Koss. Or no, or yeah, Orphan. Orphan of
Yeah,
Koss.
Orphan is hard as fuck.
Yeah. I was like I didn't actually lay eyes on him. I was like close to it, and then I was just like, I'm bored. I'm gonna watch a video.
That's so
Um,
valid.
yeah, because I mean, it takes a long time, but now I'm way better at them. And so as far as like my recent history, uh, I have played Elden Ring like 9 to 10 times already, and I did a rune level 1 run. I did New Game Plus 6. And right now I'm doing short bow only, no leveling, no summons, no HUD.
That's so
So
insane to me. Like the no HUD and the no leveling is so much. Like, are you crazy?
yeah,
Are you insane?
it's been pretty fun. The no
I,
HUD is like I'm addicted to it now. Ever since I started doing no HUD in Elden Ring specifically, I just can't go back. It's
it
so
looks so
awesome looking.
flashy. I love
Yeah, it looks
like
so cool.
I wish there was like a dynamic fade out for it that you could toggle. That appealed to me.
It does well. They technically do, but it leaves the compass on.
Of all things, it leaves the
Yeah,
compass.
yeah, I know. And so it's just like so close to great, but then every screenshot it just kind of scuffed.
That's so funny.
Yeah,
So,
it's sad.
after playing the game so much, do you have like a favorite region or boss in like aesthetic or gameplay difficulty?
Mm, I don't have any favorite areas. I think, but I do have like a favorite element, and that is the boss attack design. Because, I mean, every veteran could tell you, like the first fight against Margit is just like it's legendary. It's got stomps, baby. The stomps like changed everything for timing, I think. And now that I know what you just said earlier, now my other favorite part is the forced directional dodging. So yeah,
It's
they
Margit's a
just tweaked a
phenomenal
few
boss.
things. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I think it's more so just like the fact that they allowed, well, they always have been doing this, but it expressed itself in a cool way, how the conversation between the people who are really good at these games and the developers. And the developers being like, no, 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 we're changing it up, you got to do it this way, no, no, no. And like those
Mhm.
stomps are like what represents that for me. The
I
stomps are like
mean,
there to trick you.
Yeah, absolutely. Like there were a lot of salty people about who were angry that Margit was kicking their ass right off the bat, and like some of those people were like long-term fans, you know? Like
Yeah, but he like once you learn him, like he cannot touch you. Like it's okay, guys. You will get there, I promise.
absolutely.
He's only so hard. But yeah, so I've been doing this a long time. I did a bit of lore in the Bloodborne days. I'm pretty sure I was the first one to expose the fact that Abritus looks like the Abritus butterfly, and wrote an article about it. At least I've never found anybody who cited it earlier than that. And so I just like wrote a little bit back then, but now I'm in, and we'll get into why very soon.
Okay, okay. I like
But
that.
first, tell me about your history.
Well, I
Let's do your
actually
rundown.
technically started Dark Souls the same year you did. Like, I
Mm,
mean, I don't really count myself as starting it until Dark Souls 2 came out in 2014, but like,
mm.
for 1 week, I bought Dark Souls 1 from GameStop because I was like, oh, that looks cool, and I died in the graveyard to skeletons 6 times or
Yeah.
something. Didn't know where to go. I didn't think to look it up, and I returned it the next time I went to GameStop. So
I
if we're
don't blame you.
if we're talking like sins of Dark Souls, it's definitely that I gave up on Dark Souls 1.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a hefty sin.
that my first game was Dark Souls 2 is an automatic sin. The fact that it's what I've put the most hours in is probably a sin. I
Hey, at least
have
it had great PvP.
It does. That was half of the hours, probably. It was.
Yeah,
I spent a lot of time on that iron bridge.
yeah, me too.
Um, and then the last one is that I've never beat Midir. I've beat every other boss in the entire series, and I've just never beat. Not even with summons.
Right.
I don't even know why. Like Godzilla did not appeal to me to slay, I suppose, but
You just like gave up. You're just like, it ain't for
it's
me.
like a 2 minute run back to him. Like they did put
Oh,
a
okay.
bonfire right next to the boss fight, but it looks like it
Yes.
was like they thought about it. And then it's like a
And
minute
they're
and
like,
33
nah,
seconds. It's like,
we'll
okay,
make them.
guys, I guess I'll just make my save file read only. But like, even then, I don't feel like doing that. I'm not gonna jump through hoops to kill Godzilla.
I
Let him
know. I
die.
haven't saved scummed yet. I'm not about to start now. Like, God.
I did save scum for my fight when I did Dark Souls 1 at level 1. I did read only save files, so I could just quit out every time I died and then load in before the boss fog,
Mm,
which is so
yeah.
easy. Like I running up to Gwyn or to Calamy or the Manus, that is a track.
Yeah, good point. I haven't done any like true challenge runs of the other ones. It's just been Elden Ring because it's actually like amazing for challenge runs because there's so many options.
hmm
Um, but yeah, I'm a little bit nervous now because
I
I'm
think
like
it's one of
definitely want to
the
go back.
You definitely should. And honestly, Dark Souls 1 is easier than some of the others as a 1 bro, because you can get pyromancies, and those will trivialize it if you want them
Right.
to. And like
Oh, I'm
Havel
down.
armor spam still works pretty well. Like it's like Dark Souls 2 is so hard, and even Dark Souls 3 is pretty hard, even though you can do like the straight sword stuff.
Hmm.
Um my friend did Bloodborne at BL4, and I do not understand that. Like you'd get one shot by everything. He
Yeah.
hasn't done the DLC, but like
Yeah,
ugh.
I just watched somebody do that. Nico over on Twitch. He's the best.
Ooh, I'll have to link them below too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, they're great.
uh
Okay.
so moving
So,
on.
yes.
Gender and Elden Ring and Soulsborne is one of the topics of this episode. And you've had quite a bit to say on it, because like this is something that you've thought out a lot. And
Mhm.
honestly, personally, it's something that's always drawn me to the Souls series, because like I like the soft representation that they put in. You know, I love Gwendolyn as a character, and like the
Right.
fact that they've always got like, the trans rings and whatever. Those are fun. They're
Mhm.
interesting. Uh Would you like to introduce your own thoughts on the subject matter?
Yeah, let me slow roll a tiny bit just to poke you a little bit more about your thoughts on Gwendolyn. Have
Ooh.
you had fluctuations on it? Because I know there's like a good amount of trans ladies in particular that have some strong words about them, you know, and about
Oh.
how the wording on the very first trans ring. Let me bring it up actually. I got my Miro boards here, so I might as well.
Yeah, no problem.
So, and if you haven't thought about it, like clearly you're just chilling. And I think that ultimately my opinion is that if given a long enough timeline, most people will see it your way and just be like, "Oh, look, cool, there's a dope trans person here." But I do understand, like I read some articles, and especially if you were like one of the trans girls getting straight washed by some person on Twitter, I could see you feeling bad about this. Um, but yeah, but I do think ultimately all of this representation will be remembered fondly, and we'll get into why very very soon. But first, I want to find this item. I don't know if I have it on here actually. Nope. Okay, I gotta look it up.
Okay.
Dark Souls 1 trans ring. Ring of Reversal. Okay. Let's read it, and hopefully that'll just jog my memory. Causes males to perform female actions and vice versa. Already we could yassify that a bit and upgrade its gayness to be like less female and male and more femme mask in its wording, but that's not really what people had issue with. It's more this part. Gwendolyn was raised like a daughter through the aura of the moon and was said to behave like a sullen, brooding goddess. So it's the thing that most trans women that I've read. Well, I've really only read like two things, but they were basically saying that because they're saying like Gwendolyn is female because of their like negative female qualities here. Like, right? It's like first
Because
of
he's
all,
described as
Gwendolyn,
sullen and brooding. Is
right?
that it? Okay.
Yeah, it's the sullen and brooding goddess part, and it's also the fact that it's not like his choice. So it's like something that they just did to him rather than it being like just something inherent about him, you know?
Yeah, I've
Like they
seen the
transified him.
yeah, I've seen that secondary part where like it's like people talk about Gwyn as being a villain because he trans Gwendolyn, but like
Yeah,
I mean, personally, I've never really like. I feel like that's a really like. I feel like that's sort of leaping the conclusions in like this subject matter, where
I
like they're
agree.
using a limited word count to describe someone as being born under
Exactly.
the sign of like what they're trying to say is that Gwendolyn from birth was raised under the sign of the moon because like he was just like that. Like I don't think the fact
Right.
that they gave him a ring and that because they gave him a ring that like that made him trans. It's like he's like a guy that was raised under the sign of the moon, and like
I agree.
that's referring to like a cultural thing of like men being born under the sign of the moon being feminine. Like, you know, like there's lots of like trans history and cultural things where people represent it like different ways, and it wasn't as we know it today as trans, but it was a way of adapting a split gender role from like the traditionally masculine one into one that like took both your like the origins of your sex but also your new gender identity. And it's like um yeah. I feel like that's a leaping to conclusions a little bit, and I don't want to say that like in a rude way because like I'm sure there's
Yeah,
some like your personal reading of it is like important to you, and
right.
however you feel about it. The first part of it though is what was the first part of it? I'm so sorry.
Oh, just
I
the
lost
fact
the
that
thread.
that because that so let's pretend we're taking the good interpretation. Uh there's still the point that like they're saying he was feminine because he was sullen and brooding. And he
Yeah.
like whiny, basically. And that's what made him more feminine. It's just like, oh, I think even under our good lens, and I think our lens is the lens you should read the story under, it's still like a little bit tone deaf, I think,
I would
to
agree with
true
that. Like,
feminism.
I think he's definitely playing like a sort of like he's playing to a stereotype of like the brooding
Right.
like person that dresses up as a woman and doesn't speak, or at the very least like a beautiful woman that doesn't speak, and how that's associated with the moon. And
Yep.
it's like that makes sense on both accounts, but like it's taking these negative traits of someone, and it's like, yeah, these are what makes him feminine.
Yep.
I was just finishing The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula Le Guin, which gets pretty heavily into gender. Like, since if you haven't read it, and for viewers
I
that
have
haven't
not.
read it, it's basically far-flung future. There's this large sci-fi group called the Ecumen, and they're sending one envoy to a new world that's not yet joined them or known about aliens. And like everyone's human, basically, but like they're different evolutions of humanity. And he goes to this planet called Winter, and everyone there is biologically like the same sex. It's homogenized, and then they go through states of every month they go through what's called Chemer, and while they're in it, one of them goes into like a male state and the other goes into a female state, and you can like fluctuate essentially.
Cool.
So very heavily into gender, and like one of the major aspects of it was that the main character is a male because he's coming from a dimorphic sex race. And he's one of his major like other characters is this person named Estrin, and he always knows Estrin is like a guy because he views everyone on the planet as a guy that turns into a woman. It's sort of like it uses this
Oh.
androcentric view of it from his lens, but part of the ending of the book is him accepting Estrin as a woman because he has to spend this time like while they're traveling up a mountain, and then Estrin goes into
I
Kemer,
can't
and there's
believe
like
that
this.
Estrin was a girl. The one whose name is almost estrogen?
Oh my goodness, I didn't even think of that. um, yeah, but like one of the ways that they characterize Estrin as a female, as he's going through Kemer, as she's going through Kemer, is that she's sullen and brooding. So like I
Yeah.
feel like there's somewhat of like a leftover sort of like older aesthetic.
Yep.
Like even if you think of these books as being inspired based off of like books that Miyazaki might have read as a child, I'm just wondering if maybe there was something akin to that he read that was like goddesses are dark and brooding and beautiful or something like that.
Mm. Yeah, that makes sense. Is Left Hand what I can't remember the exact title, but is that written by a Japanese author?
No, Ursula K. Le Guin, I think, was she was from the UK, or she
Okay.
was in the US, but she's a pretty well-known author. She actually oh, what the hell's the name? It's a Ghibli film. It's like The Wizard of Earthsea. She wrote that series, if you're
Oh,
familiar
that's
with
like the
it.
only one I haven't watched yet. I've been
It's
going
pretty
down the
good.
list of all the Miyazaki movies to like look for parallels and whatnot.
I'm not sure how much that Elden Ring takes from it beyond like the idea of dragons as divinity, and that's not even like a thing that like like dragons as divinity is just a human thing. It's not an
Right.
Earthsea thing.
Very classic. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Um, I'd recommend though. It's a good movie. Uh,
Yeah, cool. I'll definitely give it a go. Okay, so without further stalling, how about I give my little spiel about color theory and whatnot?
please do.
Okay, so we just went through one of my biggest conspiracy theories, the Pangea one, but I actually had one that came before it that is basically the whole reason I'm here at all, and that is the theory that well, there's lots of characters that may or may not be trans in this game, and that goes back to all that soft representation that you were talking about. Um, but there's a couple that I think are very that are bordering on undeniable, and the main one that brought me down this road was Radagon. And so let's get the T out of the way first, I think, because then it'll make it a lot easier for us to continue from there.
Okay, what's the T?
The T is that for people who are reading this game and like understanding or just going through the story who are queer, a Radagon is America is like a stake in the ground for a lot of us. When you say that and you talk about a character who's trying to be complete and who's trying to change and who's trying to merge with their feminine side, you don't know exactly where the allegory comes from or where it's going, but for most queer people, we knew, okay, something's going on here. Something's up, bro. Because they purposely don't give it any other explanation. So for me as a reader, I was like, oh gosh, he finally did it. He finally like made us the main character, basically. And I say us, and I just started transitioning this summer. So I don't know how much I feel that word us yet, you know? I want to kind of like prove myself to be cringy about it.
I mean, I think that you can never like appropriate something like that. You know, you started transitioning and you had those thoughts before, and anyone that has those
Right.
thoughts is in some way aligned to that like ideal, you know?
Thank you.
Sorry, it's good to just continue the spiel though.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you.
Okay.
So yeah. So I just kind of like got to this point where I was like, okay, I think the game has a bunch of feminist themes to begin with, and that's kind of something I haven't really laid out yet, but I will be at some point. And then I'm literally personally in the middle of transitioning, like as I got this game, basically, and I'm just like really into um literary analysis of video and video games in general. So I was like, all right, I guess I'm going to like try and expose this as hard as I can because basically I just started watching lore videos and nobody's bringing it up, and it was just like everywhere. It was around every corner. Like if anybody. Any of our queer friends in the audience think about Zarias/Raya, I mean, there's like very classic I'm in the closet wording all over that quest line. And it doesn't matter necessarily what she's in the closet for. I think a lot of these characters are referencing trans issues in particular. But the nice thing about allegory is that it can be molded. And when you write it really, really well, it could be molded really, really well. If you, well, some people try to make one allegory be the real one, right? But that's not really what Miyazaki does. Miyazaki's trying to like stick his little pin on the point that hits as many allegories as possible, pretty much. And that's what makes people like us geek out like crazy.
Yeah, there's like a huge confluence of meaning.
Yeah, exactly. And like once you start peeling it back, like that's what makes you know that you're on the right track. So that brings us to color theory. So excuse me. We're at the point where I know what's going on, I think. I wanted to expose it. Nobody's talking about it. So now I have to go about like, okay, so there's something I intuitively think is here. Let's figure out a way to prove it out. Because the cool thing about these stories is that they're written so well that like if you are on the right track, it should all work. And I use that to thwart myself and convince myself I'm wrong all the time. Very nice. But what I ended up coming to was using color theory to show where this theme is reused. Because, okay, if you take a storyline, right, and there's a bunch of these words in it that sound like they're referencing queer stuff, and you try to prove that to someone, they might not believe you at first, but if you can show them that all of these other storytelling elements are also pointing in the same direction, there's like a certain point that like hopefully you can connect enough dots that it'll just overwhelm someone and they'll finally be like, all right, I see it. And that's where I think color theory comes in handy with Elden Ring, because whether you're someone out there that thinks I'm full of shit or not, you can use the color theory. The color theory stands in this game. Like, it is very specifically used. It's very deliberately used and very thoughtfully used. So, regardless of whether this is all trans stuff or not, there's a lot to be learned just by analyzing what colors things are, because they hold a lot of meaning. They hold a lot of feeling associations in the game. And my interpretation kind of goes like this. I'll try and lay it out in I'm gonna use chronological, but chronological really doesn't mean anything. So, but I just think thinking about it in this quote unquote chronological way helps me understand it. So let's start at the beginning. The beginning is white. White is purity. White is birth. White is rebirth. It's the beginning of a story, right? White is made up of all the colors. But if you break it out, you're usually going to have like some primary colors and some secondary colors. And you could analyze the story based on visual light and that color spectrum, or you could do it based on like the color wheel that we use for painting. But the way I went about it was somewhere in the middle. It's kind of like its own language that's sort of similar to mixing paint and sort of similar to visual light, and just ultimately combines in its own ways. So let's pretend we have white, and then we break white into 4 primary colors. 2 of them would be human colors, and 2 of them would be divine. Our human colors would be red and blue, and our divine colors are gold and silver. And I think most of us in the audience will like instinctively know these colors are referenced a shitload in game, just like everywhere. And when red is around and when blue is around, usually they're very dominant. So I think that basically red and blue represent masculine and feminine aspects, and we got to remember that these. Let me say this the right way. The way that the author interprets femininity and masculinity is not the same way that the colors do. The colors are set up to be subverted. And that's what we're going to talk about here, is like how these colors are shown to basically just not work as categories, and how everything is like mixes of things. So we start off with red and blue, masculine and feminine, and then we have gold and silver, which could be like the divine halves of those 2 aspects.
Yeah, right. Like gold and silver representing inner and outer order, the divine portions of the Elden Ring and the
Right.
cosmos, and then red and blue are the very much like tangible body and soul aspects of what is going on
Like
in
the
life.
actual critters running around.
Yeah.
And so you got those concepts, right? But then we can make concepts by combining them. And I think that so let's just pretend there's green and there's mercury that I think are combinations of 2 things, but let's pretend those ones are not that important because they're not for this discussion. The one that I want to sell you on is purple. Purple is associated with unity in its imagery with Renala and the vows and the marriage that is portrayed very positively. The divorce is not portrayed positively, but the union of Radagon and Renala is portrayed as like a very sacred thing. So we know purple is looked highly upon, and we know that purple is naturally the combination of red and blue. So the theory goes, if there's trans characters in the game, they're probably going to be associated with purple in some way. And I can hear you already saying, well, Radagon and America aren't purple, but they have a son/daughter who is very purple. And
Nicola?
that's
Sorry,
Nicola.
spoilers.
You got it. You got it. So basically the theory goes, red is our very masculine characters, like Radon. And then so Godfrey's a little bit of an exception because he's more like he's almost full divinity in this story. He's like not very active at all. So he's like all gold.
If
But
you
the more
just as a side note, if you think about
yeah,
Godfrey as being blue, you know, he's got the blue cape and the blue
right.
robes on top of his gold emblazoned armor. He's got like the divine mastered side of the red, like the masculinity of the ferocity. But then he's on the blue side, people like associate that with manners a little. You see how Rhea Lucaria is blue and it's like very elitist and
Right.
noble. So like
Society.
yeah, so as his name, Godfrey is the name he takes when he becomes king and joins society. He takes on the blue mantle of civility, but then when he undoes that and goes into Horaloo mode, he
It's
paints
covered in
himself
blood.
with, yep, red blood. So he's full on ferocity. You know, we live in a society, I guess.
Hell yeah. Very nice. Thank you for that addition. I was like kind of like a little bit stuck on his little blue cape, but that totally makes sense.
I'm glad I could be of service.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. So we've got Radon and you'll and if you're thinking about it, Melania also fits into this category, and that is where we start to see the subversion come in because Melania is like a warrior and very much war oriented, but she also has feminine aspects in that she's literally a woman, and she still wants to protect her brother. So she's we'll shelve her for now. I just wanted to point out that these
She breaks
colors are
tropes.
supposed to be broken later on. They're like there's like
Yeah.
a basis, and then there's a bunch of characters that are literally in the story just to show you why these categories don't actually make sense.
It's almost like it creates this like very tangible like dichotomy with its colors just so that it can later on subvert them. Like if you look at yin
Right.
and yang within the Tao, one cannot exist without the other, and a piece of one exists within the other. So like, there's always going to be red within blue. There's always going to be blue within red. Like
So
there
true.
is no, yeah, there's no black and white dichotomies, especially not in Souls games where they're very much Shintoism and Eastern philosophy based. But go on, please.
Yeah, and I would say especially Buddhism, and that's like one religion that I just haven't done. It's like on the list. I want to research it, but I just haven't gotten there. So if you guys are out there hunting, definitely give Buddhism more of a shake than I have.
At the very least, look up Indra's net and think about how it relates to the Elden Ring and the depiction of life and like order
Okay.
and heretical. Like it'll blow your mind. It's incredible.
Okay, I will. I will. You should send that to me on Discord so I don't forget how to spell it or anything.
Absolutely. I'll just send you the
Okay.
wiki link when we're done.
Great. Awesome. Okay, so we've got our first two colors, right? Red and blue. Blue is like easy. We got Ronnie, we got Renala, we've got all the moon imagery, we've got all the lake imagery, and uh, a lot of one thing to note about this interpretation is that, and I haven't written about this, but this is a Jungian. If I'm using, sorry, I got a little ahead of myself. I'm using alchemical symbolism to parse this out a little bit and to corroborate myself basically. But the funny thing about that is I'm not using quote unquote real alchemical symbolism. I'm using the Jungian version of alchemy, which is like purposely misinterpreted. Well, I say purposely, I mean he would probably swear up and down it that like no, this is for real. But I think he knew he was full of shit his entire life. So that's just my note on Young. But he was the one who assigned these colors to like femininity and masculinity and these different alchemical symbols like gold and silver and water and fire to these different aspects. And he didn't know what the heck he was talking about. He was just like, yeah, these symbols are all really cool. Here, let me slap my own interpretation on top of them and just kind of like shoddily translate the original text and or ignore them completely to
He
serve
wanted to
whatever I
shove
want to
his
say.
exactly. He wanted to
Yeah,
shove his whole idea of a hero with 1,000 faces onto everything and
yeah,
put it all in one tiny, neat box. This is Carl Jung, for anyone
yes,
not familiar. If you want to look up him and his work with Hero and 1,000 Faces and stuff. If you're not into reading, there's Noah Gervais is a YouTube analytic guy that made stuff about KOTOR 1 and 2, Knights of the Old Republic. He's got a really good series on it, but
oh, nice.
yeah, not to tangent too far away, go on about his alchemical reading, because, like, it's fucked up, but it's also, like, it does put things into, like, tidy circles that we can then examine again.
Yep, yeah, yeah, exactly. So it's like it's it's kind of a bullshit basis to understand human minds on, but it's a great basis to write your story on because it's very archetypal. It's very um, it's just it pulls from like the easiest symbols, the most readily available symbols the dude had in his head, honestly. So you can set it up and then you can just topple it with like the tiniest little amount of queerness. And that is where purple comes in. And if we look around the game, there are a couple of characters that are associated with purple. Renala, who we mentioned before, and also St Trina, who is my namesake, who is the alter ego of Mikola. Mikola, as a young man, is a young man. But in the dream sphere, when he enacts anything as St. Trina, she is a woman. And this is another point in the story where every queer reader is going bing 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 bing. They're going, oh, in the dream world, they're a different gender. I wonder what that could mean. And we can pick up on it really fast, but some people might just not buy it. So you need to like kind of beef up the story, and that's where this board comes in. And I don't know how we'll like I'll let you kind of guide us around, and you can ask me about things that you're interested in. But my point here is that these symbols, if you just look around in game, you can find a lot of different descriptions where if you apply our understanding of red and blue to them and you understand their descriptions with those symbols in mind, as feminine and masculine aspects, they start to make more sense. And my favorite one to expose that is the lazuli glintstone crown. So there's a bunch of different crowns that Rhea Lucaria has for different conspectuses. And the lazuli glintstone crown is the purple one. And remember, purple is the combination of blue and red. So it's the combination of feminine and masculine aspects. So if we hold these to be true, and then we throw it onto this item and analyze the words, let's read it. Scholars of the Lazuli Conspectus study Carian sorceries, a heterodox pursuit that views the moon as equal to the stars. So, under alchemy, the sun, or under Jung's alchemy, let me be specific, the sun is masculine. Actually, that is shared by real alchemy, but not in the same way. The sun is man, and the moon is woman. So when you have a heterodox study of the moon being equal to the stars, to me, that means we are studying feminine aspects as equal to male aspects, because stars are what the sun is. The sun is a star, stars are the sun. I'm kind of equating them here in this sentence. And that's where the purple color comes from. And one other thing to note, I'll let you go, but I just wanted to add that this is specifically the Carian school of study, which was founded and made into royalty by Renala herself. So yeah.
Yeah, I like the theory. I don't like to sound disagreeable, but I agree with the idea of like the gemstones and lazuli of the crown taking from Renala's purple, because like it's Carian. Like the lazuli conspectus
Mm-hmm.
is a conspectus that is born where like they believe they worship not worship, but they study the full moon and like you know they
Right.
divine it and everything, and the full moon's represented through Renala. But I feel like when it says the stars, it's alluding to the conflict between the Carian royal family and the Reo Lucaria, where Reo Lucaria like was inevitably going to come to like conflict with Renala. Like you see this idea with the primeval sorcerers wanting to restore the stars because the stars are no longer like a thing, and they're opposed by the Carians who want to like keep their power with the moon. And I
Okay, one thing I wanna question there. What makes you feel that that they are against Caria? Because I feel like the Cuckoo are against Caria, but not necessarily those primeval sorcerers.
So there's a couple hints to it. The first one being that like I think it's in Renala's Remembrance or one of the like similar main ones before her, where it's like the Academy locked her in the royal
Oh,
library. Like
right,
they couldn't
right,
kill
right, right.
her because she would just rebirth herself, and anyone that fought her to try to would end up as one of those rebirthed daughters of hers that are just endlessly trapped there without any form or like memory of who they were. So
Right.
like they were just like, okay, throw her in there, and then we'll lock ourselves off from the world, and we'll be chill. And that's what they
Okay.
did until we show up to kill everyone.
Right.
And the Cuckoo were specifically not with Rayo Lucaria. Like, it's not like they didn't rebel against them to like try and take stuff from them, but they were very much like, okay, at the beginning of the Shattering, they were like, okay, you guys can like stay here and do whatever the hell you want. We're gonna go like kill all the Carians. And I mean, you could see that as them upholding the idea of the twin bird, where it's like the Carians have forgotten their connection with vitality, and the like Cuckoo are like, well, yeah, that's not okay with us. We're gonna mess you up. You could also see it as Marika manipulating them because she knows that Ronnie will be doing up to like be up to no good, so it could go either way. Um I only bring that up just to like, you know, as like a possible other interpretation. Although like I don't
Mhm.
think that discounts from this idea of like I'm sorry. I lost the thread, but like I don't mean I hate disagreeing, you know.
No, no, that's
Um
all right. So how about this? What would your take be on the stars part of that?
I would see it as like the Rayolucarians study the primeval stream or the glintstone that's born from it and has come to Earth. So like they're
Right.
inherently aligned with the stars. And then
Yes.
you have like the Elden Ring is specifically a star, you know, like the golden star imagery, but it's like it's unique in its sense. Like you have the stars as a faction of the night, the age of stars, and then you have the Elden Ring as the sun. So like during the day it blocks out all of the stars. So like they're sort of you know, it's like the golden star, I guess you could call it. So
Mhm.
it's somewhat unique in that sense. Like when you there's this one there's this one description that also mentions a red star in reference to the formless mother and Mikola.
Right.
So it's like you also have that, and I think the color before the star is significant, especially when you consider this as like all of the other conspectuses are people that study the stars. Like you've got the the Ulvanus, the
Right.
Keralos. I was sort of blanking for a second, but
So here's where I'm going with that. All of those conspectuses are studying the
Masculine?
stars and not the moon. And yeah, they're masculine, and furthermore, academia throughout our human history has been dominated a male dominated space up until very recent past.
Very much so. Especially like
And
I
so
mean it
that's
became more and
why
more
I'm
male
leaning in that direction.
dominated as it went from a spirituality to technology because like
Right.
it's like the same thing with codified religion where previously it was a spiritual thing as a woman and then they get pushed out of it as it becomes a position of power. Oh
Yeah,
god, the
exactly.
humans as a species.
I know. We're
um
fucking it up.
I think that's a fair point. I think one of the possible counterpoints would be that Salin exists as like the person that inherits Azur's and Lusat's desire to like unleash the primeval stream, and she is a woman herself. But like
Mm,
even her, I get where you're coming from. Like
right.
I think it's a good to point out though.
Okay. Cool. I feel you.
Yeah. I'm glad interpretations exist simultaneously and all.
Right. True. Okay, so let me expand a little bit more on purple here and how we can loop our way back to America. So America's not very purple, right? But there is something that is a little bit sneaky about purple, and that purple used to be very well. It is still very associated, but it used to be even more closely associated with black. Black is the color of memory, the past, and also death. Um, Red also has a bit to do with death, but I don't know how to parse that one out. So we'll have to come back to that someday. But purple and black in the grave violet item are directly links. The hue of ghost flame, it is believed to be useful. Oh, wait. Sorry. I read the wrong part. The grave violet, a purple flower that blooms in graveyards. The hue of ghost flame, it's believed to be useful in calling for spirits. So the grave violet mentions that Ghost Flame's hue is purple, and we don't really see that anymore. There's no purple in Destined Death. There's no purple in Ghost Flame. So what happened to it? Well, in 1.0 of the game, you can actually fight Malekith the Black Blade, and instead of having a red Destined Death, he has a purple Destined Death. So
Ooh.
at least at some point, Destined Death was directly related to the color purple. And that is kind of how, for me, this theme loops back to Marika herself, because she and Malekith are basically just tied thematically.
Yeah, and I
And
mean,
yeah,
here,
go ahead.
finish the thought. Yeah, okay. All
No,
right.
no, go for it. Go for it.
Okay. Well, I mean, this is sort of foreshadowing to the end of the episode, but essentially, I mean, like the hue of Ghost Flame, how it used to be purple or violet, that, in my opinion, definitely could correlate to the Glowmide Queen. How her being sealed away, her influence of
Right.
purple on the flame left all of the places where it appeared. Like the ghost flame turned to a pale white. So, I mean, like, if we think of Marika as possibly the Glowmide Queen, you mentioned Melina as the Glowmide person, so maybe there's
Right.
like a bit of confliction that we'll have to like work out at the end of the episode. But I think
Yes.
there's some possibilities to consider there with Marika being able to embody herself through secret purple, and also if you think of Radagon as being like a latent sort of grief or like unwieldy desires within Marika, then like her previous nature could add to that. I don't know. There's
Yes.
a lot of things to
Exactly.
think about over this.
Exactly. So if you okay, let me see if I don't want to get ahead of myself because it's kind of hard to put it all together, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Take your
Okay,
time.
so now we've linked Miarka to purple through her fear of death. So So let's pretend like you and I, we both agree that like Marika and the Glomite Queen are like very similar characters, and I do believe that they're supposed to be somehow like the same person in some effect.
America and who? I'm sorry.
And the Glomite Queen.
Oh, okay. Yes, very much so. I agree.
Yeah. So, but let's pretend we don't believe that, just because some people won't.
We can walk them through it.
Right. So, but even if we don't believe that she's related to the Glomite Queen, we do know she's deeply related to the themes brought up by Malekith, and the themes brought up by Malekith are death, and death associated with purple. And the other character who is the most associated with purple is, in my opinion, our next most trans character. We've got Renala too, but that's the other side of purple, where purple also represents vows and joining of people, not just within yourself. So we've got Marika associated with a trans character, and we've got her having an alter ego, so to speak, that is a man. We can then kind of create a hypothesis of, okay, maybe Radagon is carrying the torch for Marika in a story of transition. We've got lots of like smaller stories about transcoded characters. It's possible that the larger story is also about trans characters. So if that's true, we should be able to find all of those little clues that I mentioned at the beginning of the section that queer people will pick up on. So let's zoom in now on the Giant's Braid. And maybe I'm interested to hear your take on this item, because everybody has a different take on this item.
Oh,
But
yeah. Yeah, there's been so many theories, and honestly,
right.
I think that that like From Software changed their minds about it a couple times. Like back when the Frenzied Flame was about vengeance, I think the giants definitely might have been intended to curse Radagon or like Marika with their vengeance, and then she had like the flame come into her, and that could have been the genesis
That
of her
makes
like
sense.
Radagon side. But like now the Frenzy Flame was sealed, and like the giants weren't really cursed, and like even Radagon with the giant slayer, he's not cursed with fire anymore. He just burns himself to resist the rot. So
Oh, right.
I think the most important, yeah, that's actually, I'm sorry, the side note, but like, yeah, Radagon might have used to been, his rune might have been meant to represent fire, because like the giants cursed him, and then he also got the giants, the Fell God's Great Rune, which is why he's so big now compared to the beginning of the war.
Oh yeah, good point. Yeah, they just don't really go into it that much.
No, Radon doesn't have a lot of lore. He's got a really cool spectacle, but like they don't have a lot of like item descriptions that are like, well, this happened to Radon, and then he did this. You just know that like it doesn't even confirm that he was there at the second defense of Lindol. The best theory supporting that is that Margit defended Lindol at that point, and that if Radon had two great runes and went to Lindol and lost to Radagon, which we see in the intro painting of the timeline, if like the introduction matches up with the timeline of the Shattering War, then like he would have left Lindol after that battle, chased Godric to Stormvale based off of Kenneth Haight's dialogue, and then gone back to Caelid, and like that's all we know about him besides
just that he like really likes fighting people.
Yeah, and he definitely fought a lot of people, judging from how he festooned weapons as trophies around his castle. Like,
Good point.
I guess getting back to the braid, though, I think the most important part of it is that the fire giants, their inherent link to the fire, like, in my opinion, it's the crucible of life that they tended, but according to the Erd Tree, it's the flame of ruin. I think that's just like dualism of Elden Ring at play, like at the grand scale.
Good point.
Possibly, whatever the case, it represents fire and masculinity and like the power of life within them. So like for Radagon, as like you've got Marika, who represents like the Elden Ring, like the two fingers, the causality side of it, but then her alter ego Radagon has the fire as his aspect, and then you've got the three fingers with the frenzied flame. So like there's a continuation of this idea. Like even the misbegotten would follow with that, because the misbegotten are people that made contact with the giant's flame. So they too have reddish hair, the leonine misbegotten, and I think like the in-game data code references Radagon. It's like they used to be like Radagon's warriors, or
Radagon
I don't
children,
know.
actually.
Oh, okay.
Children of Radagon.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the stuff, I think you're hitting it right on the money there, that a lot of the stuff that has to do with red directly got changed at the last second, and a lot of it got ditched, I think, because they just didn't have enough, or it wasn't good enough, maybe. Because like Vengeance can be a lame storyline really easily, in my opinion.
Yeah, I
Like
don't think the
it's really
idea.
easy to not say anything useful when you're talking about Vengeance.
Yeah, it's like the most you can get into is cycles of violence, and since
Right.
we aren't like living in 800 Iceland or like 800 Sweden and regularly going to feuds with tribes that lived 100 miles away from us, like, it's not much as much of like a potent and telling theme as much as the misery of
Yeah,
wanting it all
exactly.
to end is. So like I can see why they changed.
Most of us once we hit adulthood, we're not well, I don't know. Maybe this is a part of other people's lives, but I'm not out here enacting revenge all that often. It seems like a very childish emotion to explore to me.
You're not pursuing complicated plots of vengeance, Trina. I mean, like, what are you doing
No,
with your 20s?
clearly I'm wasting away. Not doing anything with my life. So, oh yeah. So before I lose the thread here, let me say. So for me, the giant's red braid. Let me read it real quick. Every giant is red of hair, and Radagon was said to have despised his own red locks. Perhaps that was a curse of their kind. And we already talked about how perhaps it was a curse of their kind. D- Who knows what it means? Could mean anything. But to me, under this interpretation, the whole of this sentence is one of those little like queer ding 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 symbols for me. Um, Red, as we established, and giants themselves are the masculine aspect in the world. And if Radagon literally is America, and Radagon is at war with the redness inside of him, then he is at war with the maleness inside of him. And if he's at war with the maleness inside of him, then to me, yeah, that really adds up for someone who is having trans thoughts. And the cool thing about it is I tried to decide whether I thought Mariko was like AFAB and she's trans mask, or like exactly what she is, but like it doesn't really matter, because when you first start thinking about transition and start questioning your gender, um whichever way you're going to lean at the end, you're going to go through turmoil about your gender right now. So it's like the story works for all sides. Like it's a shared experience for all trans people, I think, to have just like tension with their like whatever they see as a gendered trait within themselves, within their body. It's just such a common thing for us to go through. So having that be a starting point for Radagon as a character arc is like perfect to me. It's like, oh, yep, that's a trans person. And then if we move on to later on in his life when he's married to Renala and he's trying to like pray the gay away, so to speak, um, we have the Mask of Confidence. And the Mask of Confidence, like even just in name alone, my friend Jean, who helped me on this project, who is also an amazing lore creator, I bet you could get her on here at some point. She's very smart, and she was like, yeah, I didn't even have to look at the description, but we're gonna read it anyway. And the description reads: when Radagon married Renala, he ordered the Carian magic preceptors to don these masks, to make it clear that all of their matters were to be kept strictly private. And again, we just have like these little like ding ding ding, like you hit the head on the nose, like there's somebody who is very ashamed of their masculine aspects, who has a secret that can't get out no matter what. And yeah, it's just like classic hidden, not so hidden queer story to me.
I
And then
mean,
I want to hear your thoughts first, but we can get into like the smoking gun and why I really sold on it after that.
okay, yeah, absolutely. Like moving on to I guess like what I want to say is that like I very much agree with what you're saying here. Like there's this like everything you said about Radagon, his major conflict with himself and his self-hatred, like that's all there. Like it's in the lore. Like the idea of resisting the flame, of becoming perfect and mastering it, like it's what being like the true king of want is in Dark Souls 2. It's what sitting atop the throne is all about. It's like what the Ivory King is trying to do when he tries to contain the old chaos. Like there's this idea of mastery of self through achieving perfection. And
Mm-hmm.
like you can see that so much in Radagon, who like out of every character in the game, like from a lore perspective, he has the most obvious sort of 3 arc pattern. Like his counterpart
Yes.
Marika has it, and some other characters can have it, especially the ones you go on side quests with. But like Radagon
Yeah,
within the
Ronnie.
lore, yeah, Ronnie's a big one. She's so like written. She just has so much written about her. Um, but like Radigan, he starts as this champion of the Golden Order, and he's just warmongering. All he is about fighting.
Right.
His signature move is Gold Breaker. Like there's this very telling thing. And if you look at him from like a dichotomy view of Marika being femme and him being mask, it's like, oh well, Marika's the non-fighter, she's the Radarika, she's the vessel of the Elden Ring, and he's the like fighter and stuff. But then you can also see it as like there's like a flip side. Like they are the same person. Like Marika has this
It's
ascribed femininity through like the magical stats, which have their own ascribed femininity, and Radigan gets the physical stats, but they are the union of one being. Like you have it
right.
on your Miro chart, the idea of the alchemical rebus, the idea of a male and a female in one body, and that body being a divine, godlike being. That's what
Yeah.
Marika slash Radigan is. They are, one being. Um, and like I love that, and I love that like this idea of like Radigan seeking perfection through understanding of the Elden Ring, Marika seeking perfection through understanding of the Elden Ring, everyone seeking the Elden Ring. It's this metaphor for seeking your own truth. Like the Elden Ring
Mhm.
represents a transcendental truth of the world, and the person who is Elden Lord represents the wielder of that truth. Your own view of the world is what exists. That's why you can like fundamentally change things upon becoming Elden Lord. It's why Ranni can break it all away and do her own bullshit. Like
Mhm.
it's a quest for meaning. So Radigan as someone that tried to perfect himself so that he could be the best and most perfect Elden Lord that would be eternal. Like he's the god that should have lived a life eternal. The Golden Order should not have ended, and it ended because Marika shattered the Elden Ring. And maybe it would have ended otherwise. Maybe Radigan would have never been able to hold on to the power, which is what is implied because like he was imperfect despite all he tried. But
Right.
like
And they didn't even really seem to be merging until like the breaking part of it.
um
But
I've
that's
seen that.
debatable.
Yeah, that's like a debatable thing. I'm of the
Right.
theory that like the game tells you that they're the same person is like a way of very explicitly meaning that they've been the same from the beginning. I think like some of the people that ascribe like timeline stuff to it are like like I think
Right.
the queen lived a very reclusive lifestyle. Like she wasn't just seeing people every day. Like she was doing goddess shit. She was like the god emperor of
She's
doom.
girl
Like
bossing.
fuck yeah, she's totally girl bossing. Like
Yeah.
going into the second item description, the mask of confidence that you described. I love this idea that like Radagon is sealing them to silence because they know his secret, and like there's a shame in it. But then there's also like
Yep.
the political intrigue. Like, what was Radagon's skeleton in his closet? Like Muriel
Yep.
talks about it, and then you get the Mask of Confidence, and you're like, what was so important that he wanted secrecy? And like later on, you learn that the Carians were plotting against both Raya Lucaria and Lendl, so maybe they were plotting an uprising, and if we understand Ranni is inheriting the desire for an Age of Stars from her mother, Rennala, it's probably like Rennala was plotting an Age of Stars, and then she failed when Radagon left her, and then
Yep.
Ranni started plotting it, and like, you know, she can succeed or not based off of you, but like the Preceptors knew that Radagon was Marika. That's why that along with the conspiracy to rise up and do an Age of Stars, that was like why they were sworn to secrecy. Like, which is awesome.
Yeah, it's so cool. And
like,
the thing is, it all works. It's like if you're asking yourself which is it, it's all of them.
It's all
It's
of
like,
them.
It is an allegory on purpose, and that's the beauty of allegory, is you get to have two stories.
And I think that's so bold of FromSoft to make this idea like there's the alchemical rebus, there's the common pattern of gods having multiple forms, there's the dualism of Elden Ring, but there is so much an idea of gender equality and showcasing of gender. Like in Dark Souls 3, we get that whole like in Bloodborne, we've got like gender has no regard on ability. You know, it's like
Right.
you know, it's a soft promotion of equality, and like they didn't have to make Marika have a Radagon alter ego. Like that's a choice on their part, and the fact that Radagon is ashamed of himself, the fact that Marika is definitely like the original being because she's
Right.
the older one with a backstory, like there is a degree of like, oh, I am dealing with my body, I'm dealing with a self-hatred of myself, and to perfect that, I'm seeking the Elden Ring, I'm seeking meaning, and like you can apply that to any self-hate, but for anyone that goes through like these dual aspects of dysphoria and euphoria, or even body image concerns, you know, like the fact of hating
It's
your
very
own body,
similar.
yeah, it's definitely there, and it shouldn't be discounted.
Yep. It's just, it's so good. It's so good.
It is. This has been Elden Kings, episode 13, Elden, Gender, and More. Brought to you by r/Elden Ring Discussion and her affiliate subreddits. We'd like to give a special thanks to St Trina for so kindly coming onto the episode, and would also like to wish her a happy birthday as of the release date. And thank you to all the viewers who came this far as well. Stay tuned for the next episode where we'll wrap up our thoughts on gender and the trans between, as well as dive down into some of the lore concerning the Glomide Queen and her secret identity. As always, don't you dare go hollowed on us.